That's it. We created an app right in Flutter project and connected them both programmatically. Let's create new folders and files for authentication-related feature. We created a new folder called Features. Inside this folder, we created another folder called Authentication, which is the app's feature itself. And in this folder, we will soon add another feature called Events. So inside this folder, there are subfolders called Controller, Services, and Views. The Controller folder handles the logic and user interactions. The Services folder manages the communication with AppWrite for authentication services. And the Views folder deals with the user interface components for authentication in our Flutter app. This folder structure helps to organize and separate different aspects of authentication-related code, making the codebase more maintainable and scalable. We added two new Dart files here called the homepage and my app. The homepage is our landing page once a user has been authenticated. The my app is to store the my app widget to make our main Dart file concise. More into that later. Go to the main Dart file, and let's just erase this pre-built code so that we can start from scratch. This line of code imports a set of pre-designed widgets from Flutter's material design library, which makes it easier for us to create visually appealing user interfaces for our chipIn app. Just type in stateless W and hit enter. Flutter will provide you with a stateless widget template. We'll name this my app, and after that, let's now create a main function that will serve as the entry point of our program. As I've mentioned earlier, we'll make the main Dart file concise, so let's move our my app widget to its designated Dart file called my app. Go back to the main Dart file, erase the my app widget. You will get an error here because we need to recall the my app widget from the separate Dart file. Let's launch our device emulator by going to the command palette and type Flutter Launch Emulator. Once the Flutter Launch Emulator is visible, let's run our program to see what it looks like so far. Just go to the main Dart file, which I mentioned the entry point of our Flutter program, and click the Run button. Wait for the app to complete loading. We're just seeing a black screen, so let's use the Material App widget. Our home will be the Auth main view widget, so let's create a new Dart file for that. The Auth main view is the place where the user can see the option to log in or sign up. Instead of stateless widget, we will use the stateful widget. The stateful widget is used because the Auth main view widget needs to keep track of its internal state and may change its appearance or behavior based on user actions. As you can see, the user can choose to log in or sign up. The Auth main view is changing its state, and that's the reason why we're using the stateful widget instead of the stateless widget. So let's change the container widget into a scaffold widget so we can start adding structure to our Auth main view. So let's try to run our app. Let's quickly fix the error in the widget test Dart file. Since we moved the my app widget from the main Dart file earlier, let's just call the my app widget again to update the import path. And remove the unused import. Great! After creating the Auth main view widget, we now have the place to put our login view and signup view. So let's create new Dart files for login and signup view. Let's start with the login view. So this code defines a login screen in a Flutter app using stateless widget. The screen has a form with two input fields, one for entering an email and another for a password. Users can fill in their email and password, and the app will show an error message if they leave any field empty. Additionally, there are two buttons on the screen. One button lets users log in with their GitHub account. We will add the login logic later. And the other button allows them to log in using the provided email and password. This widget is designed to create a user-friendly login view for your app. Let's proceed with the signup view. This code defines a sign-up screen in a Flutter app using stateless widget. The screen allows users to sign up with their GitHub account by clicking on the button. Additionally, it has a form with input fields for users to enter their first name, email, password, and confirm password. The app validates the input fields to ensure they are not empty and that the email is valid. If any validation errors occur, the app will display appropriate error messages. Lastly, there's a sign up button that users can click to register their account. So this widget creates a user-friendly sign up view for our chipIn app. Before we move on, I just want to let you know that the form fields are incomplete for the time being. It should have a last name and username field, but we will add those later. Let's continue writing code in our auth main view widget. This code defines the main authentication screen for a Flutter app using a stateful widget. The screen has two tabs, one for the login view and the other for the signup view. Users can switch between these tabs by tapping on the bottom navigation bar. The login and signup views are separate widgets imported from other files, login view Dart and signup view Dart. The onItem tapped function handles the tab switching when the user taps on a different navigation item, and the select index variable keeps track of the currently selected tab. The app's title, chipIn, is displayed in the app bar at the top. So in summary, this widget, auth main view, sets up the structure of the authentication screen, allowing users to toggle between the login and signup views using the bottom navigation bar. So far, we have created an authentication UI. So let's make it functional by utilizing the AppWrite backend service. So let's create a new file called AuthService. Let's break down the code. This code defines an AuthService class responsible for handling authentication-related operations in a Flutter app using the AppWrite backend service. Client, account, and databases are static variables representing connections to the AppWrite backend. They allow the class to interact with various AppWrite services. CreateUser is a method for user registration, which takes user details like first name, last name, username, email, and password. It creates a new user account by calling the AppWrite API and displays appropriate messages based on the success or failure. CreateSession is a method for user login, taking the user's email and password. It creates a new session using the AppWrite API to authenticate the user and handle success and error messages accordingly. Logout is a method to log out the currently logged in user. It calls the AppWrite API to delete the current session and handles the success and error messages. For now, that's it for the authentication service. Let's create a new file called AuthController. This code defines two controller classes, login controller and signup controller, responsible for handling user interactions related to login and signup functionalities in a Flutter app. So here's a brief overview of each controller. Login controller. It manages the login process. It has a form key to handle form validation, an email controller and password controller to store the user's input for email and password. The login method is called when the user submits the login form. It attempts to log in the user using the auth service by calling createSession. If successful, it navigates to the home page and also clears out the information that the user typed in for each of those form fields. And if an error occurs, it shows a snack bar with an appropriate message. Signup controller. It manages the signup process. It has form key and multiple controllers for each input field. First name, last name, email, username, password, and confirm password. The signup method is called when the user submits the signup form. It attempts to create a new user account using the auth service by calling createUser. It also clears out the form fields after successful signup. If successful, it shows a snack bar confirming the account creation and logs in the user by calling createSession. If an error occurs during the signup, it shows a snack bar with an error message. To make the auth controller file useful, we then need to update both the login view and the signup view with our login controller and signup controller class. This makes the authentication feature functional and not just the UI. So let's start updating the login view. We'll then proceed to the signup view. In the updated login view, we added a custom controller called Login Controller to manage user interactions and form validation. This helps keep the code organized and maintainable because controller-related codes are in a separate Dart file. We just have to create a new instance of the Login Controller class to use all the text form field controllers. A form key was included to facilitate form validation. The login controller uses this key to ensure valid email and password entries before proceeding with login. The text form field widgets for email and password now have their controller properties set to login controller, email controller, and login controller.password controller, respectively. This binds the input fields to the auth controller. The login buttons onPressed checks if the login form is not empty and if it is valid. If both conditions are true, it calls the await keyword to wait for the login method to complete. Let's update the signup view as well. It's pretty much the same as what we did on the login view. We added 2 new form fields for last name and username. Each form fields now have their own controller properties. That means it recognizes and uses whatever inputs the user types in each form field. In the email, we have a validator function. This is used to validate an email address entered by the user. The validator function takes a value parameter, which is the email address entered by the user. The function first checks if the value is null or empty. If it is, it returns the error message, "Please enter your email." If the value is not null or empty, the function checks if it matches the regular expression pattern. This pattern matches a valid email address format. If the value does not match the pattern, the function returns the error message, "Please enter a valid email address." If the value is not null, not empty, and matches the pattern, the function returns null, indicating that the email address is valid. That's it. Our authentication feature should be functional. So let's try to create an account and verify in the AppRet console. So there's some sort of a bug here. After we create an account, it should route us to the homepage. However, when we look at the homepage, it's currently in an empty state. So let's improve our code just a little bit so that after the user has been authenticated, they will see "Hello World" in the homepage. Let's save our code, and you'll see that the bug has been fixed. On the back end, it creates you a session. So let's go back to our AppRet console to verify if the account has been created. In the auth section, under the users tab, you'll see that it's empty. So go ahead and refresh the page. Perfect. You can now see the newly registered user. So let's try to log in. Great. Things are working properly. We're almost done with our authentication feature, but let's provide the user with a better experience when trying to create an account. So assuming that every user has a GitHub account, we will provide them the option to log in or even sign up using their GitHub account. So let's create a new file called AuthService. The AuthService class handles GitHub authentication in our chipIn app using the AppRet backend service. It creates a static instances of client and account from AppRet service to communicate with the AppRet server. So this function initiates the GitHub OAuth process. It creates an OAuth 2 session with a GitHub provider. If the authentication is successful, it navigates to the homepage using the navigator widget. The class handles any exceptions that may occur during the authentication process and prints error messages accordingly. Now that we have set up our GitHub OAuth programmatically, let's enable that service in our AppRet project. So assuming that you don't have a GitHub account, I will walk you through setting things up from scratch. So open the GitHub website, create an account, and follow the system prompts until you reach your GitHub account's homepage. Click your profile and go to the settings section and navigate to the developer settings. Select OAuth apps to register a new application. Name your OAuth application. Go back to your AppRet console, and in the auth section, head over to the settings tab to view the list of OAuth services. Look for the GitHub and enable it. So copy the URI link and paste it to the authorization callback URL field. For homepage URL, you can put any link there, or perhaps our GitHub repository link. Once done, register the application. Copy the client ID and paste it to the app ID of the GitHub model. Generate a new client secret and paste it to the app secret field of the GitHub model. Click Update. Go back to the GitHub and click Update Application. Perfect. Now go back to our Flutter project and let's make the GitHub buttons functional. Let's start with the login view. Let's use the async and await operations and call the initiate GitHub OAuth function from the OAuth service, so that when the user presses the button, it will trigger the operations within it. So let's do the same thing in the signup view. Save, and try to click the GitHub buttons from the login view and the signup view. As you can see, the GitHub OAuth feature of our app is functional. Awesome. We've finished building the authentication feature of our app, so let's move on to the next feature, which is all about events.